lovely people. Did you get a snack? Oh, a snack, a good snack, just like right as rain, especially if it's spicy Cheetos. Anyway, they should be paying me for saying this. Anyhow, let's continue on with our little exercise, a little sojourn into applied ethics. Recall the issue in applied ethics we're looking at in this module is, how do we get women into more leadership positions? And again, not just women, but also other persons of color and other underrepresented groups. We're just focusing on women since it seems to be a current kind of issue. Anyway, we've seen how James Rachels suggests that we have implicit prejudices and biases, and they can be really powerful and insidious, again, because we're not conscious of them, yet they influence us. And we don't want to have them often, and yet they influence us. And so his solution to reducing the impact of these implicit prejudices and bias is through the use of quotas. The general idea of, as he's saying, is our judgment is corrupted. We tend to favor one group over another, again, unconsciously, and we don't even know what it's happening. So he wants to give something very mechanical and like quotas. It's just going to be like, look, you need X number of women or X percent of women. And do it. Because he does say that if you restrict a hiring committee, that they have to hire one woman, they can do a very good job of hiring the best woman. No problem. It's just the problem is if there's men in there, that woman might be overlooked, again, because of implicit bias. So that's also the hope, is that, okay, we apply this mechanism, set aside a certain number of spots or slots or whatever it is for women, and then we go out and look for the best woman to fill those. And he says we do a pretty good job of that. It's just when the men come in is that when then the implicit biases start to kick in, and we might overlook those good women in favor of a man who might not be, well, I won't get too far ahead. We'll get there. Anyhow, but in order to justify quotas, Rachel doesn't just say quota. He does say, look, we're not going to use quotas for everything. He thinks that 4 things have to hold in order for quotas to be applicable. And so we'll see. There's probably situations involving men and women that we don't need quotas. I have a feeling, though, he would say it's probably still going to be a broad space for using quotas, as we'll see in a moment. So let's go through these 4 conditions. So the first criteria or condition for having quotas is that the decision has to be subjective. And here's what I mean by subjective, that it involves human judgment, which is pretty much a lot of judgment, right? We're making them. But what he means by this is it's not like something computational or something objective. The idea is that if we're selecting a candidate for a job, that's often going to be based on things that just can't be measured scientifically. Now, of course, there might be tests and things to narrow down the candidates. If you're hiring an accountant, you probably want to make sure they're good at math, right? So there's that thing, and those things we can test pretty well. So that's the kind of mechanical or objective part. But oftentimes, though, when it comes down to hiring the final person, that's when the subjective elements come in. I mean, look, last March, no, I guess February. February is when I flew out here for my job interview, my job talks and stuff. And I was told straight up this was going to be a subjective thing, that the people just wanted to see if I was a nice person that they'd get along with. Because everyone they had picked, they were happy with in terms of, ooh, these are smart people. But I was Mr. Personality. I won't lie, I was thirsty for this job. So I really went all out, and I worked for this job my butt off. But anyhow, the idea, though, is that often hiring that final candidate, there is going to be an element of subjective. Do I like this person or not? Even if we say we're looking for the most experienced person, again, what counts as experience can be quite subjective. Not necessarily. In a lot of cases, a computer can't just spit out the answer of who has the most experience. A person has to make that decision. And so that's that subjective element, that individual judgment deciding who to hire. We have all these great candidates. We weeded out the people who don't know math, or whatever it is we're looking for. We got, but now we're left with this big pool, and we have to decide who to hire in this pool. And that can become, a human judgment. And that's a subjective judgment. Then that's where the implicit bias and prejudice has the gateway to corrupt the whole process. Again, this is only the first condition. It's just that there's a subjective human element involved. And all that means is that it's possible for implicit bias to corrupt the process. Doesn't mean we need a quota yet. It just means, okay, there's a subjective and judgment involved. Implicit bias might come in. Doesn't mean it has come in, but it might come in. So right now with condition 1, we're like, oh, this is a little concerning. It's a little subjectiveness here. That means bias could help influence things or corrupt things. So that's the first one. Subjective human judgment is involved in the decision process. That's number 1. Number 2, we look and see that the decision tends to favor one group of people over another. So now this is the second step where we're trying to gather some evidence and start to see if there's a pattern. So again, number 2 is decisions seem to favor one group over another. We're looking for a pattern. So you might, if you go to one of these hedge funds, you might look around and be like, wow, almost everyone here is a white male. And again, so there is a pattern. So again, that's still not enough. Just because there's a pattern does not necessarily mean we need quotas yet. All we've established so far with these 2 conditions is it's possible that there's implicit bias. So that makes us a little nervous, like, oh, maybe this is bias. The second says there's actually evidence that one group seems to be favored over another. Not enough yet. We still need 2 more conditions, but at least now we're getting a little nervous. So again, we see it's subjective, implicit bias is possible. That's number 1. Number 2, we're seeing that there's a pattern where the decisions seem to favor one group over another. Still no reason to panic yet. But now the third one is going to start to make us even more nervous. And this is the third condition, he says, for quotas, is that there is no reason to deny that the 2 groups of people are not roughly, oh man, I hate this. I'm using double negatives. Hold on, let me see this. There's no reason to deny that the 2 groups of people are roughly equal. Okay, let's make this more positive. There's no reason to assume that one group is better than another. Let's put it that way. That way is better. I don't like the double negative. So again, you're like, what is going on here? What these? Oh, there's a spider web. Great. I'm surrounded by spiders in this house. Oh, I need a wife here bad. I need help. Jenny. Anyway, where was I? What are we talking about? Oh, yes, quotas. Condition 3, I just mangled. Condition 3, there is no reason to deny that the 2 groups of people are equal. Or there is reason to assume that... Let me say that one last time. Number 3, there is reason to think that... I can't say it, can I? Oh man, I want to stop this. I'll just finish this. I'll just read what I have here. There is no reason to deny that the 2 groups of people are roughly equal. In other words, there's no reason to believe that one group is better than another. There it is. There's no reason to believe that one group of these people is better than another. So again, just because there's a pattern, that doesn't mean there's a problem. Because again, you look around and you're like, yeah, almost everyone here is a white male. And then you think, well, yeah, but I think women and people of color, persons of color, are qualified for this job. And I'm like, yeah, so why are all the white males here? So we have the pattern, but there's no reason to have that pattern, except for, you can guess where this is going now. So again, we're seeing 3 things. I've mangled them horribly, got distracted. I'm sorry. I hope you're watching this at a high speed. I do apologize. Still, those 3 things are not enough to have a quota. All we've said is that implicit bias might be playing a role because it's subjective. Human judgment is involved. And then we're saying that there's a pattern. That's number 2, the pattern, that decisions usually favor one group over another, say men over women. That's number 2. Number 3 is that we can't justify this pattern. That is, there's no reason to believe that men are better than women, or there's no reason to believe that one group would be better at this job than another group. So again, there's a pattern, but number 3 says we can't justify this pattern. All right, still not enough yet. We're almost to quotas. We need number 4, condition number 4. And that is, number 4 says there is a reason to believe that it is implicit bias. That is point number 1, is the problem here. It's not something else. It's not that women aren't applying for the job. It's not that women are unqualified for the job. It's not whatever, right? It's that there must be an implicit bias. And so that's the idea here, is the 4th step identifies the problem as likely being implicit bias. So if we're promoting more men than women into leadership positions, we need to think carefully, if you're in an organization that's doing this, carefully about, could there be implicit biases at work? And this can be incredibly difficult to determine, especially if you're part of the organization. This is why Rachel says, you might need to hire or consult outside opinions. Tread carefully. Don't just assume bias is playing a role, but try to get outside opinions like, is it that really just women don't like this job, and so that's why the hedge fund is full of white men? Or is it that something is going on that is actively excluding women from getting these jobs or getting promoted in these jobs? It's difficult, and that does require then some, real thinking and outside work. Because again, tread carefully. We don't want to assume it's the worst case. We have to think carefully. And again, often outside observers can be better judges about whether we might be acting on implicit bias, because it's hard when you're in it, right? And so putting this all together, Rachel's would say, yes, we may use quotas for women in leadership positions if the following 4 things are true. 1, subjective human judgment is involved in selecting leaders. So implicit bias might be corrupting the process. That's number 1. Number 2, there's a pattern. The decisions typically favor promoting or hiring men over women. So that's the pattern, number 2. 3, there is no reason to believe that men are more qualified or better or more deserving than women. So we cannot justify the pattern we're seeing. And then number 4 is there is strong or good reason to believe that this pattern that we cannot justify is due to implicit bias. And it's that subjective judgment where implicit bias enters that is causing more men to be chosen over the women. And again, I think if James Rachel's was alive, he would think that these probably 4 hold with women. We just look at lots of data that would say, yes, hiring decisions are subjective often, at least when it comes to the final candidate. And obviously, the data that I just showed you shows men in these positions more than women. And then you might say, look, women are getting educated and coming out of business schools, in some places at higher rates than the men. So it does seem that the women are there. And yet we can't justify these leadership statistics, especially, again, when you're dealing with 50% of the population only having 20% of leadership positions. And so we might have to conclude that it is the subjective judgment, it is implicit bias at work. So that's how I think Rachel's would defend this. Again, I'll leave it to you to think about on your own. Maybe no flame wars on this. I have a feeling there could be, this one might cause a flame war. I hope not. But I'll let you decide and think about for yourself, do you think these 4 conditions hold for women and other underrepresented groups in leadership positions? But I hope, my goal is, of course, as always, is just that you understand Rachel's 4 criteria. Even though I botched the 3rd one, I hope by the end you understood what it was. I tried to say it many times after that. But again, I just want you to understand these 4 conditions, that if these conditions hold, Rachel's thinks that we need quotas to stop, block, and end, well, maybe not end, that might be more tough, but at least prevent the impact of implicit bias. Because again, we're mechanically forced to pick a certain number of women or other underrepresented groups. And like he says, and I agree, is that when we're looking just at trying to hire the best woman, we do a dang good job of that. And so the quotas might help us by making us do that. Whew, all right. One last quick break. Then I can wrap up the module by looking at how Rachel's responds to some common objections about quotas, objections that we still see today about California, about Europe. So anyway, we'll come up more on that in a moment. Why don't you take that one last quick break and we'll wrap up this module on bias and prejudice and quotas. All right, see you back here in a moment.